Hello and welcome to today's webinar, BIM/Revit for Commercial Interior Design. This webinar is brought to you by Live Lab Learning, which is a subsidiary of Academic Corp, a wholly owned applied software company created to provide world-class training. This is Mark Mincy, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. Today we will be highlighting how to effectively use BIM/Revit for commercial interior design. Throughout our presentation, we encourage you to interact with us by typing in questions and comments using the questions pane. We will be answering the questions at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to you online on our YouTube channel. If you haven't already, search Live Lab Learning on Facebook and like our page to receive the latest information and special offers. When you visit our website, livelablearning.com, spelled out on the top of the screen you see there is a complete schedule of upcoming training. Following the Q&A at the end of the webinar, there will be a $25 Visa gift card. You must be present to win the gift card. Now, Applied Software is a platinum level Autodesk reseller which has won many Autodesk awards for excellence. The platinum level is the highest level Autodesk reseller and is achieved by demonstrating the ability to deliver the highest level of solution expertise, service, support, and customer satisfaction. Applied Software also provides other solutions for the architectural, engineering, construction, manufacturing, and simulation markets. Please take note of our upcoming webinars. We have the Higher Education webinar on January 14th, which is targeted for colleges, and universities to address their license changes. We also have the Southwire BIM on January 26th, and it's about an exciting new product we represent for electrical contractors. And I would be remiss if I did not mention we are offering a promotion on Autodesk term software licenses that ends January 22nd. Autodesk is changing how they sell their licenses starting February 1st. Make sure you get your perpetual licenses before they're gone. If there are any questions on the promotions or the Autodesk license change, please reach out to me. And you'll see my contact information at the end of the slideshow. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter. He is a senior AEC technical consultant and has been my joy to work with Rick on numerous projects with our satisfied customers. He has several decades of experience working as an architect and as a Revit instructor. One of the exciting projects Rick has been working on as of late is the BIM execution plan for the University of Central Florida. And I also want to highlight we've been working with another interior design firm, converting them or helping them switch to BIM Revit for all their projects. And they've had several different training discussions, and they continue to grow. And it's an exciting experience that Rick is going to bring to our presentation. Today, he will leverage his own expertise using Revit to share with you how you too can leverage Revit for interior design. Please join me in welcoming today's speaker, Rick Kramer.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome everyone. I appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy schedule to spend about 45 minutes to an hour with me, with us, going over how to use Revit in an interior design application. Basically, to give you a little bit about myself, I have a Bachelor's of Architecture from University of Florida, so if there's any Gators out there, go Gators. Also have a Master's of Architecture from Florida A&M. I have about 20 plus years of experience working within the industry. So I've been there, done that, done all the production, and basically been in all the different aspects of architecture in working for firms as well as general contractors. In the past 8 years, I switched over to Revit, and I call myself a Reviteer. For Revit, I got to tell you folks, If you haven't gone to Revit, it is an incredible experience, and it's a very easy transition. I'm a certified professional for Revit, as well as a certified instructor. I co-authored the BIM execution plan for University of Central Florida, and most recently actively teaching BIMteriors to several Florida and Georgia-based companies. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I remind everyone, you're on mute, so go ahead. If you have any questions throughout the whole presentation, please add them to your comments. I won't be able to see them, but we'll answer them at the very end. Okay, so I hope you're ready. We're going to go ahead and get started. So first, we need to find out, do you need to do everything in Revit on your first project? And the answer is no. Actually, the way that I believe in teaching Revit is having a blend of Revit and AutoCAD. In this type of environment, you can utilize all your projects that you can crib from previous projects. A lot of times, you'll have information that you'll want to use from previous projects. So in the class that we teach, here's a class outline of showing exactly of what we're going to go through pretty much today in the hour. I'm going to go through our course outline. But should you decide to take our class of in BIMteriors, this is exactly the course content. We start off with test fits, then enhancing the model, working on custom reflected ceiling plans, doing schedules and schedule keys, creating custom views, phases, and design options. And basically, this particular class is a prerequisite. I should say you need to take Revit fundamentals or know exactly how to use Revit. This assumes that everyone taking the class already knows Revit. So let's go ahead and get started. So when you're starting to work on an interior-based project, what type of background do you have? Do you have a Revit project? If you do, this is the best option. Most of the times you might be working with an architect or maybe another engineer or something of that nature, and they provide you a Revit background. In this case, this will give you the best contextual information to base your drawings off of. There's no guessing. Next, if we do have a project like that, then you can begin to develop your model in 3D from existing geometry, and then basically, let's say we were doing this project here as a infill or fit up, then we would have the existing shell and core, and we could work on interior upfits for this particular building. Matter of fact, the building that you're looking at here is our sample building that comes from a real project in Atlanta, Georgia. If you don't have Revit, a lot of times you might have an AutoCAD file to work from. This same drawing given to me from an engineer, we have the core and shell. If you have the CAD file, this is going to be your second best option, and most commonly used for importing into Revit. There's tips and tricks which I go through in the class, basically showing you how exactly you need to prep your DWG files to bring them into Revit. It's really, really critical. I can't stress enough when you bring in drawings from Revit that they need to be purged and cleaned out. Such little things as deleting hatches is a common overview, or it's usually people miss it in the fact that they're supposed to delete the hatches. You want to basically have your AutoCAD file be as minimal as possible. Next, if we had an AutoCAD file, we could simply click on the existing AutoCAD line work and put in place Revit walls. Now, what happens if we don't have Revit, we don't have AutoCAD? The next is a hand sketch, starting from what I call a blank slate. Now, there's problems with this. If we bring in, for example, this hand sketch that I have here, you'll notice that this blue box indicates the perimeter or the shell of the building. A lot of times our sketches that we bring in are not in scale, because of course they're drawn in at an 1/8 or maybe on 11 by 17. And you'll notice on this particular one, it's slightly skewed. So the challenges with bringing a hand sketch into an existing environment is scale and rotate, and basically a little bit more troublesome. You can't click on the lines because they're just, well, they're just lines. Now, everyone always says to me, Rick, how much do we need to model? And the question is really, how much do you need to see? When you're visualizing the space, do you need to create 3D renderings of the space? Do you need to have a quantity? If so, what and how much you do depends solely on that. Also, can you use existing CAD information in your design? And one of the things I believe in, again, is reusing your CAD drawings in an environment where I have considered like a hybrid approach, where I bring in CAD and Revit to bring into a project. And CAD can be limited to one view or be shown everywhere. And basically, the question I always get asked is, how much do I model and to what level of detail? I personally use 2D and 2.5D content when 3D is not needed everywhere. And I modeled the detail information where needed, not everywhere. So for example, if I were to do a wall section and do a call out of that wall section, I would just do a blow up detail of that wall section or a parapet, and information would be provided there, and I wouldn't model it everywhere. And that is basically where you would draw the line. As a further example, you can see a composite between CAD and Revit are showing new walls, existing, and imported CAD line work. This again is our sample file, a project that we would work on in our class. So the exterior, you can see it's flat, depicts our core and shell. It's AutoCAD line work. We don't need to model it, so therefore I can focus on the existing or new walls that I'm bringing in, as shown in the darker gray. Now, a lot of times you might have the ability to work from a hand sketch. Now, traditionally, hand sketches are fast, and they're great for designers that aren't using Revit. You can leverage staff without using Revit and or really pretty much any software application. The other ability is to take from AutoCAD, like we showed before. You can then bring in AutoCAD information. This is for designers not using Revit. This is kind of a recap of basically different ways in which we can use or reuse projects. And if we start with a Revit project, we can do what's called test fits. These test fits include area information as well as renderings. So you have a dynamic area calculation. And if I want you to take a look real quick at this image, the image that you see here is basically based off of a hybrid. It's a AutoCAD background, but we've inserted smart Revit floors. So we can do area calculations as well as I can print this out and put it on my color board to show the client or clients different design options. This way, it gives me the opportunity to get not only rendering information, but also area calculations. The way that we work within Revit is that we have also this ability to stack or layer information. As you see here, starting from the ground up from the bottom, you have the CAD base plan. Ideally, this is probably 90% of the time, this is the way that things are brought into Revit. When you're working with an existing, let's say, architect who only works in AutoCAD. Within Revit, we can determine the gross area, the core elements. We can bring in a SCAD, scan or CAD import for the test fit, and then finally an interior layout. The top portion of this interior layout is all done in Revit. Other things that we can take away from this is programming and area analysis. One of the most critical things in Revit is the ability to quickly and easily calculate rentable versus gross area calculation based on BOMA. We can do program calculations and add certain parameters, which you'll see later on in the next slide, to basically help calculate if we've met the program. Lastly, we can also do area analysis. We can add values and conditional formatting. The great thing about this is if you haven't worked in Revit before, as you seem to update the floor plan, your information will change automatically. in our class, we have a room area schedule. I got to tell you, folks, this is awesome. When I show this to my class, it's really, really nice. I know you can do a regular schedule in AutoCAD, but having the ability in Revit, you'll see in the bottom part here that's in red, it'll automatically calculate my square footages for all the rooms. If I have a spreadsheet that I can look at to determine what my program requirement area is for those rooms versus my actual area, you'll see actual area versus program area. If there is a difference of, let's say, 10%, and this is completely customizable, it'll automatically highlight red the area that's in delta, that difference, more than 10% off of the program. What's great about this is that I can click on that little box that's in red and highlight the model. I can go to the model wherever it is and determine immediately where my bust is. And this kind of information is live. What's great about this is that you can give this to your client and you can make sure that your area calculations are spot on and you're not over-designing or under-designing. Next, our presentation graphics. You have the ability within Revit to do different types of color schemes, color fills, shadows, 3D cutaway, perspective camera views, walkthroughs, and then something else, which I'm going to leave to the end. The opportunities that you have within Revit are simple. For example, if we wanted to start out with simple graphics, we can come with just a simple floor plan or 3D image. In this case, these are just color fills. A lot of times I might make this just black and white to give the idea of the design to our customer or to the client. If we wanted to take it to a different type of level, maybe we're just at the very beginning of our conversations with our clients. We want to give an impression of sketchiness. Now, what's great about this is this particular drawing that you're looking at is not hand-drawn. It's actually created within Revit, and then we're applying different techniques to color fill and then also create a sketchy look. By one simple click, I can change this to a hard line perspective view. In this case, I've created all these different sketchy looks and a little bit of a hybrid between the two of them. You can see in the bottom right starts to take it from the sketchy look back down to something that's hard lined. Now I'm using simple colors here. The reason I'm doing this is that I haven't determined yet with the client what are my finishes. So keeping it generic or general gives me the opportunity to have that discussion with my client. Once I find out what those materials are, I can do now a photorealistic rendering. And I got to tell you, folks, the rendering inside of Revit blows me away. If anyone's worked on 3D Studio Max, you know the capabilities of 3D Studio Max. They've now incorporated the render engine within 3D Studio Max into Revit. You also can now render to the cloud, which really, really makes putting together such things as these color boards much easier. So I can now incorporate into my physical color boards floor plans and layouts to show what objects actually look like. So when I do my color board and I have my samples, I can also get these images from the 3D rendering. And what's great is most of the companies, manufacturers, are providing Revit content. So as you can see, you can combine the color boards that we've been doing for past 20+ years with new technology. Now, this is the most exciting thing. For me, I got to tell you, this is Google goggles. And it's called a stereo panoramic. And these Google goggles, and by the way, that's not a picture of me, are created within the Revit environment, and you export out to the render cloud. You'll notice over here in this little drop-down, you can render as now a stereo panorama. Before, if anyone had tried to do this, it was very cumbersome. Now you can take any model in Revit, and you'll notice a little goggles between what looks like the green dial and the sunflower. Those are goggles. If you export this out to a stereo panoramic, you basically get an image that is two stereo images. you can simply just take this image with a cardboard cutout from Google that starts at $4 online all the way up, and you put your smartphone in there, and now you have the ability to actually stand in the space and look everywhere around. And I got to tell you, if you haven't tried this out, try it. Pretty much everyone on the call, I'm sure, has a smartphone. If you do, this technology is there for you for pretty much free. And it's really an opportunity to wow your clients and have a competitive edge. Imagine if you go into a competitive environment where you're bidding for projects and you're going after a project and you're doing your typical interview with your color boards, but then you put on these Google goggles and you pass that to the board and say, here, take a look at the space. Look how much we've invested in looking at exploring our environment. And this is pretty much done instantly and relatively cheaply. So now back to Revit. Some of the things that you can also do are finish schedules and finish keys. The way that we like to work in Revit is based off of room finish schedules. You can define schedules for when the design begins to typical storefront and add more design finishes as the project goes. One of the things that you'll notice here, for example, is we always work in room finish schedules, right? Everyone on the call here as an interior designer or an architect has some type of schedule that they work on. As interior designers, we're constantly updating and changing our room finish schedule. We have the ability to pull that information live from our model. So if we change it, for example, in the room finish schedule, it changes the floor pattern. For example, if I change the elevation lobby right now, which is ST1, and I change it to carpet 1 in the schedule, it'll automatically change it in the floor plan. It'll change it in the 3D views. And to take it to the next step, we have something called a schedule key. Now, this is something that I found a lot of companies don't take advantage of. The key basically gives you the ability to group different areas. You'll see palette A and palette B highlighted over here. And basically, if we have something that I call palette A, which is all lobby spaces or public spaces, I can click on that and it'll automatically fill in floor, base, wall, and ceiling information. If I have areas that are offices, bars, those are palette B, and when I click on that, it automatically highlights and changes the floor, base, wall, and ceiling. Previously, a lot of people just click one of these scheduled items one at a time. Schedule keys is something that I teach in class, and I got to tell you, it's a huge, huge time saver. You can do the same thing for example, for door schedules. When you receive your door hardware group, you can put hardware groups and basically have that information fill in automatically on your schedule. This, by far, is one of the best time saver features in Revit. Next, we have finishes. One of the finishes, for example, you can incorporate into family systems. If you have real finishes, you can split those finishes and even paint them onto your drawings. You can also have floor finishes by graphically indicated by different colors, and you can get information such as material takeoff, quantity amounts, and then tag them. For example, over here we have an elevation. In this simple drawing, by the way, for those of you who haven't been introduced to Revit, this is all one drawing. As you see on the bottom right-hand corner, this is my material takeoff. When I have information in here, I can see exactly how much information, how much material is being used in my project, how much ceramic tile. And if I associate a cost with that, I can also get a cost quantity takeoff. The split face, for example, versus paint, you'll see in the top left-hand corner, I can literally take a single wall. For example, if I'm the architect and I supply you a background, and my Revit wall is just stud and gyp, just generic gyp. As interior designers, we want to go through and have different finishes. in Revit, we can be as creative as we want and basically do what's called a split face. And you'll see this little S curve. And we basically split the face of that gypboard wall without affecting the architect's model, and then assign WD1 versus ceramic tile 1. And all that information is live. So the quantity takeoff for that is now included in our material takeoff. It's really, really easy to update this kind of information in a live model. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I do. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to add them in the comment box. Next, we have the ability within Revit to do what's called design options. Now, for those who do design options, you have to make it for spaces that are within a project. They're not completely a different building. They're basically separate models within a space. This is excellent for exploring multiple options for specific areas within a building. And you can set views for those options. Now, I have to tell you, one of these also can be incorporated ultimately into your chosen option, basically your first choice, your primary option as it's called in Revit. And then the other options, let's say we have option 1, 2, and 3. The owner decides to go with option 3. The other 2 options will be automatically removed from Revit. So there's no remnant of it. For example, in these design options, simply put, we have a space. In this case, the design options are for this conference room with configurable, easy for me to say, right? Configurable tables versus one individual long conference table. We explore some other design options, but basically the design options are within a space. We can also then choose one of these 2 options. And if the customer or client goes with option 2, we make that a primary. Option 1 disappears. So another little tip and trick that I'll throw out there today is that right before you do design options, or when you're done with design options and you're about to give it to the client, make a milestone set. Save your project at that point in time and archive it, okay? Then the client can then pick option A or option B. And if you needed to, you can always go back to that archive set, because once you move forward and pick your primary option, the other one's gone. Next is phasing. Phasing can be integrated into every project, and it follows a linear timeline, just like it does in real world. We can have demolish, existing, and new. And views can be dependent on those particular phases. And by the way, I have to tell you, annotations do not have phase parameters. This is kind of a little bit of an advanced subject matter, but nonetheless, for those of you working in phases, your annotations are not subject to phasing. They kind of ignore it. And one of the things that you can do is this is great for creating work that's in renovation or creating additional work. And basically, this is good for simple construction phasing. So for example, if we had a prior construction drawing, an existing drawing basically, and then a demolition phase and a new construction, all of this is enclosed within one Revit file. I got to tell you, this makes life a lot easier for controlling a project and basically not having to depend on 3 separate drawing files like you would in Revit. Like you would in AutoCAD. In Revit, you have the ability to have all of this information existing in one. And the prior construction, for example, a lot of times I see prior construction and demolition phase as AutoCAD backgrounds. And quite frankly, it makes it simpler to distinguish between the two. And then our new construction can be all in Revit. So a lot of times, the firms that I work with have AutoCAD backgrounds, and we use those AutoCAD backgrounds as prior or existing and demolition. Well, that's really it that I have for our session today. What I'd like to do is now open up the mic, or actually go back to Mark here. Or Mark, back to you with any questions. We're going to go to our panel, and see what kind of questions we have. And I hope you all enjoyed today's little mini session on using Revit for interiors, and you can see how powerful it is to use Revit in that capacity. So thank you all, and I look forward to your questions. Mark?
Yes, so thanks very much, Rick. Hey, you did a great job. Appreciate you sharing all that information. We do have questions, so I do want to continue to encourage everybody to ask your questions by typing them into the pane on the right-hand side. And we'll start with a question that John has. It looks like a great question here. AutoCAD architecture walls have embedded hatch patterns. Do we have to stripe the hatches out of the walls before you link to Revit?
Okay, that's a great question, John. Absolutely. Basically, when you have AutoCAD architecture or architectural desktop objects, whether it's in floor plan or an elevation, and you have the hatch patterns that show up in those drawings, you basically want to go through and do a couple things. You're going to export out that drawing in floor plan or an elevation view to a separate drawing, typically through W blocking or export, and then flatten. Basically, at that point in time, you take your architectural desktop or AutoCAD architecture drawing and squash it into individual DWG files. That DWG file then, now with your elevations with those hatch patterns on that wall, you go through and delete. Do not just turn off the layer. Revit will still bring in that information even though you can't see it. So you want to make sure to delete that information and delete the layer. You also want to do a purge and audit on that file as many times as you can to make sure of getting rid of all the information. Hope that answered your question, John. Thanks for your question, though. Good question.
And John, if it didn't answer your question, feel free to write in again another question to clarify anything that we need to get you. We have another question from Jillian. Can multiple people work in a single file?
Oh, great question. Jillian, thank you so much for asking that. Yes, and yes, and yes. All right, so in Revit, it's called a central file. You can have, I believe, up to 999 people working on one project. And the way that it works is completely different than in an AutoCAD environment. All of you on the phone probably are very familiar with an AutoCAD environment of XREFing, right? Well, Revit takes it a step further. You know, if you're in AutoCAD, and I'm going to put my AutoCAD hat on, you open up that AutoCAD file, it basically locks that to read only by anyone else, right? In Revit, what happens is you have what's called a central file, and it sits on the server. Everyone on our team, Jillian, opens up that project and creates a virtual identical mirror copy on my computer. So I'm working on it. Let's say, Mark, I'm involving you here. Mark's going to be working on it. Jillian and I are going to be working on this, the three of us. Now, when we each open up a project, we're making our changes. We synchronize our changes back to what's called the central file. Let's say, Jillian, you're adding some information to it. When you synchronize it, it just sends that delta change information back to the central file. And then when Mark and I synchronize, we get that information to our drawings. Now, let's say both of us are fighting over an exterior wall that we want to work on. If you had selected the wall and started to work on it, it basically locks me out of that wall and basically tells me if I click on it that, Jillian, you have that wall, and I can send an IM request, and it pops up just like it does on your smartphone saying, hey, Rick wants to use this wall. Do you allow or deny? And if you're feeling feisty, you can say, nope, deny. But most of the time you say yes. And so then I'm allowed to then make those changes. So to answer your question, absolutely, to go back to it, yes, you can have multiple people working on one project at the same time.
Yes, that was a very good question. So I have some more questions here. Gregory talks about he was so busy watching the webinar, he enjoyed it so much, Rick, that he wasn't able to take notes, and he was asking how long to have it recorded, or how long before the recording is published, and it could take up to 24 hours to publish the recording, so continue to check on that. Give us a little space to get that out to you, but it should take maybe a couple days. You can check on our YouTube channel. Another question here from Stacy. Actually, Stacy has quite a few questions here, so we'll start with number one. I would be interested in how you create or add alternate design options for the general contractor. And two, let me get this. Two, my company uses a software called HatchKit, and we bring in our patterns to apply to our finishes so that it is modeled and hatched accurately. Do you have a recommended or a different, more advanced add-in software?
Okay, great question, Stacy. Now, here's the thing. First, the design options, yes. Basically, the key with design options in Revit is it's not a change of the entire building, the shell or the core. They're walls within. So, for example, if I have a different layout, interior layout for a space, that I could do as a design option. But you need to have what, in my mind, and basically is the core and shell of the building that's intact, that's existing as is. You can have design options for furniture. You can have design options for room configurations. And those will basically, you can export out as well to your general contractor as a DWG file, for example, or in Revit. And then you have the conversation with the general contractor and say, option A, B, or C. At that point in time, you select that design option and make it what's called a primary, and it'll delete your other options. And again, you have to, I can't stress enough, make an archive, because at some point in time, someone might change their mind. Now, HatchKit. The HatchKit, I think it's even called HatchKit 22, or that by far is one of the best HatchKit program software out there to make custom hatches. Here's the wonderful thing about it, is when you create hatches in AutoCAD using HatchKit, the same PAT files can be used within Revit. So you don't have to recreate hatches. You just have to basically point the hatches in AutoCAD from Revit, and it'll read those in. And it works great, especially if you're working with HatchKit and already have hatches. You can reuse those hatches in Revit.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rick. And also we have a question from Kit. I noticed that when an engineer sends us a Revit file from another version, we can't share back to them. Isn't it backwards compatible?
Kit, good question. Unfortunately, it's not. So let's say, Kit, we're working in Revit 2016, latest, greatest version, right? Mark, I'm going to pick on you, for example. Mark's our engineer. He is working in Revit 2014. When he sends us a drawing in 2014, we open up that drawing and save it. It'll be in Revit 2016. When we send it back to them, when we send it back to Mark as the engineer, sorry, Mark, it'll only be in Revit 2016. In the previous versions, they won't be able to open it. So basically, anyone on your team, whoever is the lowest common denominator of their version, that's the version you have to go with. So unfortunately, Kit, if your engineer is working on a previous version, you also be working on that previous version if they cannot upgrade. Now, you can get with the salesperson, if you're on subscription, you can get up to 4 back. So if you're on 2016, you can have 14, 13, I believe, and then you can open up any drawing and work in that version. But there is no saving down. Sorry.
Thank you, Rick. I don't have any more questions in the panel here, but I'm going to give you a minute or two to get any last questions in, because we still have that $25 gift card that I'm going to give out here or pick somebody. But while I'm giving you a little opportunity to enter your questions, Stacy did have a comment. She said, I would enjoy a how-to webinar for using Revit to create furniture plans for a public bid project that incorporates sorting, phases, and DB links. So just a suggestion from Stacy. And again, we do appreciate your suggestions. You know, you can write them to us, or write a general email if you think of a topic that you'd like to have us present. We do appreciate your input as far as giving us ideas. Sometimes we always looking for things. Okay, what are people interested in? And so having your feedback, great. We have a question from Juliana. What is the best website for family furniture?
Okay. You know, family furniture, that is going to be one of the best sites that I would recommend actually is Autodesk Seek. That's autodeskseek.com. If you Google it, basically they have a clearinghouse for all of the manufacturer's content for furniture, for mechanical, electrical. And I'll give you a little tip. When you go there, there's a little button on the top right-hand side that defaults to the United States. If you change it over to Europe, you'll have 3 times the amount of information, or different information and content that you can look at. The fact that it brings it in metric doesn't matter, because if you're used to Revit, you know that you can bring in Revit content, and if you're working in Imperial, it automatically switches it over to Imperial. So my recommendation is first, Autodesk Seek. The second would be Revit City. Between the two of them, you'll find an incredible amount of furniture. Also, if you go to your manufacturers such as Knoll and Steelcase, they have some really, especially Steelcase, have some incredible systems, furniture systems that you can put in place that has power and also different design options and fabrics that are just amazing.
So a little bit, Juliana has a comment onto that, Rick. She said, I guess the question is, which one do you like the most? Most of them are over-modeled and too big.
Yeah, if they're over-modeled and too big, the best thing that I would recommend is basically open up those families in Revit and strip them. Strip them of materials, strip them of information that is not necessary. Manufacturers tend to put every detail in there because they tend to think clients want that level of information. But if you have 100 of them in your project, they'll weigh down your project considerably. Another thing to consider is having your families, if you're familiar with family creation, to only show, for example, symbolic lines in floor plan view. When you do that, it lightens up your model tremendously, and then only show 3D content, 3D views.
Thank you, Rick. We have a question from Julia, and so she asks, where do I find the design option on the Revit file?
Okay. The design option in the Revit file, basically, everyone should see Revit over here. Does everyone see Revit starting up on my browser over here?
They can't answer you, but I do see it.
Okay, good. So right over here under your Manage tab is Design Options, right there. When you start Design Options, right now there is no Design Options. Here is where we would begin to put Design Options. And for example, we can have sets. So this would be, let's say, conference room. And we would have option 1 and 2 within this conference room. We could have a new set, and that could be for, let's say, the main area, and we would call this main area, and then do sub-options, and we can have as many of these as we want within this area. You'll notice over here that it says primary. Basically, if we were to click on that and basically make that our accepted primary, you'll notice a warning and other options disappear, basically creating our design option of primary, our only one that we choose. That is where design options is located. So take my class, you'll get more.
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you. We have another question of John. Have you used any energy analysis software through the Revit file to determine usage and calculate HVAC sizes?
Yes and no. I know it exists. Quite frankly, I have not used it. One of the things that you can do within the Revit MEP environment, and that is the systems environment here on the screen, after you place the systems, basically you have the ability within Revit to click what's called all these different area rooms, and these spaces will calculate the quantity of air required. Those calculations can be done automatically. If you want to learn more about that, please email Mark, and he can get you in touch with our Revit specialist.
Thank you much. We have another question from Samantha. While doing a walkthrough, is there a way to adjust the eye level height for the view frames? Also, the walkthrough file tends to be really huge. How can we reduce the size of the file? Thanks.
Okay, that's a great question. So basically, when you're going through and creating the 3D view, doing a walkthrough, I'm going to come over here and basically do this walkthrough right here, finish walkthrough. If I click on that walkthrough, you'll notice that I have the ability here to, right at the beginning, let me do it again, change the height as we're creating it. So when I create my walkthrough, so I did that pretty quickly, right here is the eye level. So right now it assumes the eye level is at 5'6". If we wanted to do a worm's eye view, put it at 6 inches, and it'll create 6 inches from the finished floor. When I'm doing this walkthrough, and I finish the walkthrough, you have the ability to create that walkthrough, and basically when we export that walkthrough, it is going to create a walkthrough at full resolution, basically at 1:1, uncompressed. When you have that come up, you want to go through and basically create the walkthrough to be a compressed walkthrough. It basically will give you that. You want to use Microsoft as the interface, and it'll compress it. It's one of the dialog boxes.
Okay, I think that is the last question for everyone. So again, we do appreciate your time today and again, allowing us to share this information with you. Now it's time to give away the $25 Visa gift card. And again, just remember, you must be present to win. So I'm going to be looking over at the list and just choose a name. Let's see, somebody who's still, Kimberly. Now, if Kimberly is still here, she needs to IM me or send me a message, and then I will give you that or have that $25 gift card sent to you. If I don't hear from you very shortly, we will pick another name of the people who attended this. So I'm looking for, yep, that you, Kimberly. We do have a winner. Yes, that Kimberly, and I'll try to pronounce your last name. So again, We thank you, everyone. And again, here's my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. And Kimberly, we'll reach out to you. We got your contact information and get you that $25 gift Visa card. So again, we thank you for the presentation. Rick, any last comments?
Nope. Thank you again. And if you have any specific design requirements, or not necessarily design requirements, but training, focused training that you would like to see or have conducted in your office or virtually, please reach out to Mark and we can coordinate and do a focused specific type of training for your office needs. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.